Horror in Pittsburgh in a synagogue as a maniac fueled by hate opens fire on worshipers. Hello and welcome to a special 2-hour edition of Justice. I'm Jeanine Pirro. Thanks for being with us tonight. We're going to talk politics a little later, but first the latest on what's been a tragic day in America. At least 11 people are dead and several more, including 4 police officers, are injured after a gunman walked into the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh and opened fire. The horrific act taking place during a baby naming ceremony. Officials have confirmed tonight that the victims were apparently targeted for one reason: their faith. Here's what we know about the shooting suspect right now. He is 46-year-old Robert Bowers, a man who apparently had made anti-Semitic comments online, but was not specifically known to law enforcement before today's massacre. He was injured in what investigators believe was a shootout with police, but is in custody and is expected to survive. President Trump has condemned the hate-filled crime as a, quote, wicked act of mass murder. But the president did go on with a planned political rally earlier this evening in Illinois. Here is some of what he said.
Before going any further, I want to address the horrible shooting that took place earlier today. The hearts of all Americans are filled with grief following the monstrous killing of Jewish Americans at the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You've all seen it. You've been watching it. It's horrible. The suspect is in custody. The federal authorities are on the scene and leading an aggressive federal investigation. State and local law enforcement has been incredible. This evil anti-Semitic attack is an assault on all of us. It's an assault on humanity. It will require all of us working together to extract the hateful poison of anti-Semitism from our world. This was an anti-Semitic attack at its worst. The scourge of anti-Semitism cannot be ignored, cannot be tolerated, and it cannot be allowed to continue. We can't allow it to continue. It must be confronted and condemned everywhere it rears its very ugly head. We must stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters to defeat anti-Semitism and vanquish the forces of hate. That's what it is. Through the centuries, the Jews have endured terrible persecution, and you know that. We've all read it, we've studied it. They've gone through a lot. And those seeking their destruction, we will seek their destruction. Now, when you have crimes like this, whether it's this one or another one on another group, we have to bring back the death penalty. They have to pay the ultimate price. They have to pay the ultimate price. They can't do this. They can't do this to our country. We must draw a line in the sand and say very strongly, never again.
And we'll hear live from the president's son, Eric Trump, in a moment. First, though, let's get the latest on the shooting from Fox News reporter Garrett Tenney, live in Pittsburgh.
And Judge, several seasoned law enforcement officials have described this scene as the most horrific they have ever seen. Several dozen people were inside the Tree of Life synagogue this morning for Shabbat services, including some, as you mentioned, that were for a child blessing naming ceremony. It was around 9:45, 9:53, just after those services had begun, when a man walked in with an assault rifle and 3 handguns, and he reportedly yelled, "All Jews must die," before he opened fire. Within a couple of minutes, the gunman had killed 11 people and injured 2 others. As he started to walk out, officers arrived on the scene and engaged him. he shot one of the officers and ran back inside, where he continued an engaging gunfire with SWAT officers as they tried to talk to him. By the end, he had shot 2 more officers, received several gun wounds himself before he surrendered. This evening, Pennsylvania's governor said words cannot express the way his state feels tonight.
My heart breaks for the members of the Jewish community. Today, all of Pennsylvania mourns with you. Anti-Semitism has absolutely no place in our Commonwealth. Any attack on one community of faith in Pennsylvania is an attack against every community of faith in Pennsylvania.
The FBI has identified 46-year-old Robert Bowers as the suspect. They say he is from here in the Pittsburgh area, and there's not a whole lot they know about him at this point. They are trying to gather up more of his background, who he was, what he's been up to, what potentially led him to commit this attack. We do know that he was believed at this point to have been not have been on law enforcement's radar prior to today's shooting, but they are searching several of his residences that he was associated with here, including an apartment. And earlier tonight, some neighbors of that apartment told local reporters that he was quiet, kept to himself, but they said they didn't see any red flags throughout, and that's a common theme we hear in situations like this, Judge. The FBI says that they do plan this to be a full, wide investigation that will be covering every aspect of this man's life. They are digging into his social media presence, and one of the things they are investigating is the possibility that he may have announced his intentions to carry out this shooting on social media. This afternoon, the social media site Gab, which bills itself as a free speech alternative to Twitter, said it verified and then suspended an account that was linked with his name. And on that account, the account had made several anti-Semitic posts, including one just before the shooting this morning, which concluded with, quote, "I'm going in." Now, we're just getting word that the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania has filed charges against that suspect just in the last few minutes. Earlier, Attorney General Jeff Sessions said those federal charges would include hate crime charges and would include the possibility of the death penalty. Judge?
Garrett Tenney, thanks so much. And joining me now on the phone, Executive Vice President of the Trump Organization and the President's son, Eric Trump. He joins me now by phone. Good evening, Eric.
Good evening, Judge. How are you?
Your reaction, Eric, to the horror that happened today in a place of worship in Pittsburgh?
Listen, America mourns, right? I mean, this whack job destroyed lives. He upended a community. He should get the death penalty. I mean, there's no question about it. He should absolutely get the death penalty. You know, there's 11 people who are no longer on this earth because of his actions, and it's horrible. And you know what we do in time like this also need to give a major shout-out to law enforcement, because the job they did today was incredible. I mean, just absolutely incredible.
Right, and I'm going to talk about that more with some of my law enforcement guests. But, you know, Eric, as we look at the news of the past week, is it a sign of the times? Yesterday, someone arrested for sending pipe bombs to several people, and then today, this individual shooting up in a place of worship and killing 11 people, 6 more injured. Is this a sign of the rhetoric and the outrage that people are hearing? Is there any correlation between the two?
I don't know. Listen, there might be and there might not be. I mean, at the end of the day, this is obviously a very sick, deranged human, subhuman. He shouldn't even be called a human, but, you know, I mean, it's a very, very sick, deranged person. They did this, and, you know, it seems like we've gotten to a point in life and society where everything has to be kind of politicized. Everything has to be, you know, somebody has to point the, you know, political finger to absolutely everything. I mean, at the end of this day, this guy is a sick person. He did the most unthinkable thing imaginable. He went to a place of worship, shot it up. Again, there are 11 people who are dead now because of it. And, you know, I think we should actually try and pull politics out of some of these things. I mean, this person doesn't represent the left. He doesn't represent the right. The person was sick, deranged. And again, I truly hope, if found guilty, which he will be, that he gets the death penalty.
All right, and certainly a good point in not viewing everything through the political lenses that people seem to be looking through these days. But let me ask you about your dad. Your dad indicated today that he thought about actually canceling the rally. But he said something interesting. He said, we don't want to let those crazies control, what we do. And it kind of reminds me, Eric, I mean, you were in New York, in New York City on 2001 9/11, as was I, where we all said we're not going to let these crazy people stop us from conducting our ordinary everyday affairs. Do you think your dad should have gone through with that rally?
I do, and I thought he said it beautifully. I mean, he said you can't let evil change your life, and I think that's 100% right. I mean, if every single time evil lashed out, it changed everybody's pattern, it changed their lives, it changed society, society stopped, you'd live in a much different world. And, it's always incidents like this, whether it be the 9/11s or, tragic shootings like the one we had today, that actually brings America together. And, clearly the person is trying to tear apart, our country apart, a community apart. They're trying to do massive evil. And it's amazing how the world works, that, sometimes it actually does the exact opposite. Once you get past the horrible act, it actually brings society together. And, you have an entire country that's mourning for, a small town in Pennsylvania and for a specific synagogue and for a group of people, again, whose lives were upended. And so, this does bring America together in a time where, you can say that, America can often be fractured because of, so many different, variables.
I think the sad part, it's always sad, but the selection of a particular group based upon their religion in a place of worship on Shabbat. I mean, it is a particularly heinous act. But let's talk about what's going to happen in the next 8 or 9 days, the midterms. How does America turn from its focus on some of these horrific things that we're seeing daily in the news to focusing on what's important in terms of the country continuing on the course that it's on, and getting people to focus on real politics as opposed to the rhetoric that is making up politics?
Well, and you do hope they focus on the real issues as opposed to rhetoric. This obviously aside, because this is absolutely horrible what happened, and you have other tragedies. I mean, obviously look at the hurricane that hit North Florida, the Panhandle of Florida, so hard. But obviously, those are unthinkable things. But you do think that people can get past some of the other rhetoric that they see in the media every single day, because Judge, America's winning right now. I mean, we're winning. Our economy's winning. Our military's winning. Our veterans are winning. I mean, just about everything's winning. I mean, we've got the fastest growing GDP and, one of the fastest growing GDPs in the history of the country. We have the lowest unemployment. Manufacturing's coming back to this country. The stock markets are at record highs. 401ks have done tremendously well, and I can go on and on and on. The price for prescription drugs is coming down, something that my father made a big focus on last week. I mean, I could talk about it for hours, but, I mean, our country is thriving. We're no longer getting ripped off by China. We're no longer getting ripped off by Mexico. We're the envy of the world right now. I mean, America is the envy of the world, and it's hard to say in a day like today when something so tragic happened. But our economy is doing great. Our country is doing great. We're just rated the #1 economy on Earth, and so you hope a lot of the rhetoric gets put aside, and you hope people focus on all the positive attributes and, the many great things that's happening in our country right now.
But, when you talk about it, Eric, it's almost as though there isn't one metric that hasn't improved under your father, and yet the left is so dug in, so angry. And when you see, the rhetoric of people who are congresswomen, congressmen, you wonder how you can get people to take their sights off of that anger and turn it towards something positive.
Yeah, it's almost amazing. When you're doing the best, it's almost people are the most angry, and it's kind of interesting. And I've seen it personally, where you see a lot of the left lashing out, and they don't have a great message right now. They want to double people's taxes. They want to constantly attack law enforcement. Again, days like today make that just unthinkable. I mean, they're the bravest men and women that we have in the country, but
without a doubt,
the country is doing amazingly well. We're winning. We're winning on every metric, and if you can put aside the rhetoric, and you can actually look at quantifiable, statistics and quantifiable measures, our country is doing the best it's ever done before. And as Americans, hopefully days like today make us rally around that we are Americans, that we all, bleed the same red, white, and blue. I mean, we love this country. We love our nation. We want our nation to be successful,
and our people to be safe.
Everybody should cool it down a little bit.
Yes. All right. Eric Trump, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Judge. Great to be here.
All right. Thank you. All right. Let's talk more about the suspect and where this investigation could go. Joining me now is the former member of the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, retired police officer Steve Rogers. All right, Steve. You got to tell me something I don't already know about this guy. I find out that not only is he has an active license to carry a firearm, okay, but in addition to that, he is a Trump hater. He rallied against the Jews. He had this blog. He posted on this blog, HIAS, which stands for Hebrew Immigration Aid Society. He says HIAS likes to bring in invaders that kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered. I'm going in.
Well, Judge, I'll tell you something you don't know about the police response. First of all, people have asked me all day, how is it that the police were so effective so quickly on this Pennsylvania incident and the one in New York? And the answer is the President of the United States quickly and immediately mobilized federal law enforcement officers, the FBI, the ATF, you name it, the President sent them down. And as a result, they quickly closed the case in New York. And you're going to get all the answers to those questions in PA. And let me add this. Did we not forget that it was the prior administration that took the tactical equipment police needed today to nail that guy in PA? It was President Trump who restored it.
Isn't that interesting? I remember this. Under the Obama administration, they were taking this stuff away, this tactical equipment. All right.
President Trump gave it back.
All right. All right. So we've got that. And obviously that is great. And this was an incredible amount of time in terms of how they got in there and how this coward went back in. And unfortunately, now we've got 4 police officers injured, I believe.
Yes.
All right. So this guy, we know that he had a license to carry a firearm, correct?
Yes.
All right. Do we know anything more about it? It's an active license. How did he get it?
Well, these are the questions that are certainly going to be asked. As you know, it's a long investigation, but they're going to try to find out where the weapons came from. How did he actually get it? They're going to do forensic studies on all of his computer equipment, cell phones, etc. But you know what's going to be important here?
What?
The psychological profile that the criminal psychologists are going to make on this guy after they speak to him.
All right. You and I, both in law enforcement, talk to me like you're talking to the DA at the time. Okay, good. I don't really care what his motive is because the jury, although they may want to know it, the proof is, did he commit the crime or did he not? Is he sane or is he insane? Do we know if the guy had a job? Did he function normally? Do we know anything about that?
Nothing about it right now, Judge. And these are the questions that are going to be answered. But did he do it? Of course he did it, as you said.
So then the only justification or the only excuse, not justification, that he can proffer is, I was nuts, I was mentally insane.
Judge, I don't even buy that. You know, we have people running around saying, oh, it's because of rhetoric, it's this and that.
Oh, that's hogwash.
Well, you're darn right it's hogwash. He is responsible for his actions. In regard to all the nonsense about rhetoric, what about the Hollywood movies and violence and all these other things that are around us that promote violence? What about that? Okay, so he's responsible for his actions, no one else.
And I'm going to add something else. The statement that I just read that he posted today indicates premeditation, clear intent, focus, lucid, clear, I'm going in. This guy is connected to time and space, and he knows exactly where he is.
Bring that before a jury, and a judge says guilty.
Guilty.
There you go.
Well, if the judge is,
Jeanine.
All right, Steve Rogers, thanks so much for being with us tonight. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, take care.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, and our live coverage of this breaking story in Pittsburgh continues. Special 2-hour edition of Justice rolls on in a moment with guests including RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel, Corey Lewandowski, former Washington, D.C. Police Detective Ted Williams, and more. Back in a moment. More are injured, as are at least 4 police officers who responded to the scene. The gunman in custody. Joining me now to talk about the investigation and where we go from here, former Washington, D.C. police detective and defense attorney Ted Williams. Good evening, Ted. Tell me something I don't know.
Well, Judge, let me tell you something that you do know. I heard you in the last session with Steve Rogers talking about the insanity defense.
Yeah.
Let me just make sure we are clear here. This guy, as far as I'm concerned, was not insane whatsoever. When you think about it, he not only says at some stage on his social media site, I'm going in.
I'm going in,
when
yeah.
you look at premeditation, deliberation, all of the things, the prerequisites that are necessary for first degree, they're there. Not only do he go in, he shoots up the place, and guess what? He's sane enough to try to get out of there and run away from the police.
Go
and guess
get
what?
him, Ted.
At
That's
that
right.
stage, he runs back in. And this so-called insane man then goes up to the third floor, and this insane man shoots it out with the police. This man was not insane. And if I was the lawyer prosecuting this case, I would love to have it.
And if you're defending this case, Ted?
If I was defending this case, I would try to talk to people who knew him and to talk about maybe what his motivation was to try to mitigate and everything. But I got to also tell you something else. This guy was not a fan of the president.
That's right.
If you notice, at times there's a segment of society that want to blame everything that happens in America on the president. Well, you can't do that, because if you go to this guy's social media site, you will read in there where he says this: Trump is a globalist, not a nationalist. There is no make American great again. This is coming from Robert Bauer's site, Judge.
Well, you're right, Ted. You're right about that. Everybody assumes he's a right-winger because he ended up killing in a synagogue. There's no question. This guy didn't vote for Donald Trump. He didn't like Donald Trump. And he's not insane. He's focused. He's clear. He's intent on what he's doing, and he's plain evil. And you know what? I agree with the president. There's only one appropriate sentence in a case like this.
Wait a minute, Judge. Don't say it. Let me say it.
You say it.
The death penalty.
You got it.
They need to nail his butt and put him into the electric chair, just as he took 11 lives. Judge, just think about it. You walk into a church, a house of worship, and you take 11 lives. These were very vulnerable, decent people who are not going home to their families tonight.
You know what, Ted? You talk about this is a hate crime. We both know it's a hate crime.
Absolutely.
Hate crimes don't just affect the individual who's been victimized. They have a ripple effect in the community. It is not only the individual who's being taken out in a box to a morgue and then in a box. It's a whole community who suffers from a fear that because they're a part of that community, that they're going to be the next victim. The ripple effect is huge.
The ripple effect goes way out. And as a matter of fact, it goes throughout the country, Judge. As a matter of fact, in New York, where you are, the law enforcement officers there are putting additional protection on synagogues.
As they should.
Absolutely.
Well, you know, and let's talk about it, Ted. I mean, you know, there were so many people who were against additional punishments for hate crimes, but every state in the union now, as I understand it, has hate crime penalties that are more serious because they recognize the seriousness and how expansive these crimes are, how they go beyond the individual victim. But what pains me is that there are still people who focus on hate. This guy hates Jews. A couple of days ago, I believe in Kentucky, one guy goes in and he shoots a couple of African Americans, and when a white guy takes out a gun to shoot him, he says, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'm not going to shoot you. You're white." I mean, this kind of hate is horrible, and I don't understand, other than they're ignorant, they're arrogant, and they don't deserve to breathe the same air that you and I breathe.
And you just said it. They don't deserve to breathe the same air. And this is one reason why I'm taking my hat off to the Justice Department tonight, that they are looking to prosecute this guy Bowers under the hate crime statute, because under that statute, Judge, on the federal level, it carries the death penalty.
That's right.
So therefore, this guy could very well be looking at being put to death.
Yes, yes. All right. Ted Williams, thanks so much for being with us tonight and for all you've done today. And much more on tonight's breaking news ahead. But next, we're going to talk about the march to the midterms. We're just over a week away. RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel joins me live next. Welcome back to this special 2-hour edition of Justice. I'm Jeanine Pirro, and we've been following breaking news. A massacre inside a synagogue in Pittsburgh. 11 people killed, at least 6 injured, including several police officers who responded to the scene. The shooter, a hate-filled anti-Semite, identified by police as Robert Bowers, shot and injured, but in police custody. Much more coming up throughout this 2-hour edition of Justice. But first, here to weigh in on tonight's breaking news and more as we head into the final stretch before the midterm elections, RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. Good evening, Ronna. Thanks for being with us tonight. Your reaction to some of the events of the past week. Let's start with today and the shooting in the synagogue.
Well, my heart goes out to those families and the whole Jewish community that's been affected by this violent, evil, murderous hate act. And I'm proud of the President and the Justice Department that has said they're going to prosecute under the hate crime statute that will bring the maximum penalty of the death penalty. But all of America is screaming right now for Pittsburgh and this community that has been so tragically impacted by the events of today.
You know, and yesterday, Ronna, an individual arrested for sending those, I believe, I don't know how many pipe bombs to several people in office, and those who are literally Trump haters. Do you think that the rhetoric of today is impacting the way people are conducting themselves?
Well, I think there's a common denominator in all of these things, and it's evil. And these people are deranged and evil that are committing these acts. And I don't think, as Eric said earlier, you need to look at their political affiliations or their, their party affiliation. It's about who these individuals are, and they're deranged and they're evil. And the president has taken the lead and said, we need to unite as a country against these hateful acts. And it's a time for civility. And he said last night, I was with him in the rally in North Carolina, he said, let's start focusing on the policies that we're putting forward as a government, and not on ways that we can divide each other. And I think that's the right stance, and I hope Democrats will come to the table. I know that right now Democrats and Republicans are coming together to mourn what happened in Pittsburgh. This is not a partisan event. This is something that brings Americans together as we grieve for those who are suffering.
Well, you know, that is certainly a hope because, you know, we are all Americans, and this kind of evil can't divide us. You know, if there is any silver lining, maybe it will bring us together. But, you know, to make a left turn here, midterms 9 days away. How do you get the country to focus on the issues as opposed to, number one, the rhetoric? Or how do you get people to get out of their homes when you and I both know 10 days ago, because of Kavanaugh and all of the other stuff that have been happening and the caravan, you know, people couldn't wait to get to the voting booths. Now, I'm not so sure if things haven't been tamped down with all this violence.
Well, that's where the RNC has put together, why the RNC has put together the largest field program we've had in history. We've had 60 million voter contacts thus far. We've trained 25,000 field organizers across the country. We've raised over $269 million. And all of that is so that we can make that final argument to voters in these closing days as to why we need to choose Republicans, why we need to retain the majority. And it is results versus resistance. We are the party that is delivering more jobs, higher wages, strengthening our military, caring for our law enforcement, holding them up as the heroes that they are, taking on the opioid crisis, taking on the pharmaceuticals. And the Democrats have continued to double down on two things: resist and obstruct. So the party is out there talking to voters. We are urging everybody to make sure you talk to your family, your friends. The only way we keep this comeback alive for this country is if you vote.
Okay. And, you know, what is the most important message you think that you can give to people? And, you know, Eric Trump was on earlier and he talked about how every metric seemed to be improved under his dad's leadership. But what is the message that you hope is going to move people out? And who do you think is more motivated now? I mean, you know, it depends on the minute at this point. Who's more motivated, the Republicans or the Democrats?
Well, Democrats have been motivated. Opposition is motivating, and they're so mad that they didn't get the White House in 2016, so they've been energized. But Republicans are motivated too, and the party has seen that. We have seen a rise in our energy, and with the field program we've put together, and then putting President Trump out on the campaign trail and putting him in all these states. I mean, what he did last night in North Carolina, I was with him. He's going to be making that last-minute push, and he's going to say to voters, are you better off than you were 2 years ago? Is our country safer? Is our country stronger? Are we making America great again? And on every metric, voters are going to say yes. And Democrats are offering nothing except obstruct, resist, raising taxes, abolish ICE, open borders. It is a very clear contrast between the messages that are being delivered to voters. And Republicans, along with President Trump, are making that final push to make sure voters get out and vote, because majorities are at stake and our country's trajectory, which is on the rise, is at stake. So go to vote.gop.com, get engaged. This is not an election where you want to wake up the day after and say, I could have done more.
Now, you said that last night you were with the president in North Carolina. Okay.
I was.
All right. So for 9 days, is he out on the road again? It's not even on the road. It's in the air.
He is going to be on the road at an unprecedented pace. Listen, if we keep these majorities in the Senate and the House, and it looks like we're going to expand our majority in the Senate, which is unprecedented in a midterm year of a first president, it will be because of President Trump. He has driven small dollar fundraising for our party, and he has ignited our base by getting out and doing these rallies in important state after important state where his presence shows, we've seen it in the metrics, increases the energy and increases the voter turnout. So he is going to be out there. I don't know how he does it, Jeanine. I'm exhausted already. I don't know how he does it, but he cares so much about our country, and he knows what's at stake, and he's going to do everything we can to keep these majorities.
All right. Ronna McDaniel, thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
All right. And more on the breaking news out of Pittsburgh. We'll take you to a vigil for the victims next. Vigil tonight for the victims of today's mass shooting inside a synagogue in Pittsburgh. Let's go live now to Fox News reporter Matt Finn, who's at that vigil with more. Matt?
Judge, we're just a few blocks from that synagogue where 11 people were murdered really just hours ago. It is raw and emotional here tonight. And what is so disturbing is all the people we talked to at tonight's vigil say that they still don't know the names of the people murdered inside that synagogue. So many people here in the Squirrel Hill section of Pittsburgh say they are on edge, waiting to find out if one of the people dead is a colleague or a friend or a neighbor. At tonight's vigil, people of all faith came together. Thousands of people stood in the cold rain in silence to pay tribute to those who were killed in their own neighborhood. And then there was a vigil with music and prayers, and one of the chants was, "Hurting one of us is hurting us all." And despite the strength and the love coming together in this community, people we talk to say this neighborhood will never be the same.
It had been a thought in the back of my mind that won't happen. But now that has happened, it's something we all have to live with, and it's part of this community.
It's only by the grace of God that perhaps the 4 wounded City of Pittsburgh police officers who do a wonderful job will come home.
I've lived here my whole life. I walk around, I know everybody on Murray Avenue, and now it's going to be forever tied to tragic places like other cities like Columbine, Parkland, Newtown. We're going to have this massacre over our heads in the city now.
This Main Street corridor is really the center of the Squirrel Hill neighborhood. Behind me is the Jewish Community Center, and organizers of tonight's vigil said they could not wait another day to hold this vigil tonight. They wanted to prove to people that you do not have to live in fear. And tomorrow morning, Judge, we expect to get the name of the 11 people who were murdered today. Back to you.
All right, Matt Finn, thanks so much. And next, the caravan is coming. We're going to talk about it with a border sheriff who's no stranger to justice. Don't miss it. Next. Tonight, the caravan of Central American migrants continues to make its way through Mexico with a goal of illegally entering into our country. My next guest oversees 80 miles of border in southeast Arizona. I actually traveled there in the summer of 2017 and saw for myself with him the dire battle to secure our border. Sheriff Mark Donnells joins me now with reaction to this latest immigration crisis facing our country. All right, good evening, Sheriff. Good to see you again, by the way. Let's talk about what's going on. When I was there with you, and I don't know if they had the two of us on horses. Yeah, there we are. You oversee 80 miles of the border across which you and I rode for a while. But now it appears that the president is sending even more than the original number of troops he was sending, 1,000 more to the border as a result of Secretary Mattis requesting an increase in the number of troops. Their position is that they're going to stop them from entering. How do you do that if you don't have a wall?
Well, that's a challenge. And let me say, I sat in a brief a few days ago over in Yuma, Arizona with Secretary Nielsen and the commissioners from ICE and Border Patrol, and everything's on the table, Judge. Everything's on the table about how do we do this? How do we do this?
Yeah.
You know, and I'll speak. In our county, in Cochise County, we've done some amazing work with our federal partners, Governor Ducey, Congresswoman McSally, local law enforcement. We've done some amazing things to make our county a safer place to live. But I'm telling you, this is bigger than just Cochise County. Yeah. We have a vulnerable county, vulnerable in the fact that we don't have all the fencing, we don't have all the infrastructure, and we don't have all the staffing we need by our federal partners to secure the border. And they come up in this mass. Anywhere on the southwest border, there's going to be a challenge. And we're working ways. And we have a president that's stepping up. We have our local law enforcement, state law enforcement, federal stepping up. We need congressional leaders to step up and join this fight, because securing our borders is a constitutional mandate. It's not discretionary, it's a mandate.
Okay, all right. So you don't have those congressional leaders, and in fact, you have people who in the budget have pretty much precluded the president from actually doing the prototype of the wall, for which they put in $1.6 billion in the budget. Or maybe it was million, I don't really recall. It was 1.6. But the truth is that there are all kinds of tributaries. You know, we talk about one caravan. In truth, you've got your county, you're part of Yuma, you're part of Tucson, and then you've got Yuma, but there's a whole border of thousands of miles. There's no way you can prevent them. I don't care how many military, unless they're standing shoulder to shoulder or holding hands, you can't stop these people. Am I wrong? Tell me I'm wrong.
I can't tell you you're wrong, Judge. You know I would if I could, but I can't in this case. The fact is, we know that. Our federal government knows that. President Trump knows that. And so every community, I know in our community, our local law enforcement, federal partners, we're coming together to make local plans. If they come to our county, they come to our adjacent counties. So we're working our tails off to secure this border from California to Texas.
You can't do it, Mark, Sheriff, I'm sorry. You can't do it. I saw it. They're going to walk across, and you can have as much night vision and all X-ray and everything else. You can't possibly do it. There are thousands of people. Now, let me ask you a question. Mexico apparently said to them, hey, guys, we'll let you stay here, and we'll give you asylum here in Mexico. Now, my reading of the reports are they said, gee, no, we'll walk to the United States. Was that a real effort on the part of Mexico, or were they just with a wink and a nod saying, say no, go to the U.S.?
Well, you got look at this is the big picture that worries me is the reason they take refugee, and I was told the same thing, the same intel report you're hearing. I was told this a couple of days ago. The fact that they're not taking that, and some did though. The reason they're not taking that is they're coming here because they know they can walk right in
and get money and housing and education.
And cell phone.
And a cell phone, I forgot that. All right. Now, do you believe, Sheriff, that this is a spontaneous caravan? And although, I'm going to ask you this first, immigrant apprehensions in your county and your neighboring county jumped 50% in this past fiscal year compared to last year. So I want to ask you, one, why is that? And two, do you think this caravan is spontaneous, kind of like that protest in Benghazi? It was just spontaneous, it just happened, or was this planned?
You know, first of all, you're right. We're up 50%. This is the worst human smuggling we've seen, migration, in 8 years in Cochise County and along the southwest border. So the reason it's happening is the fact that they can. To answer your question, they can. The fact is, what's stopping them? What's stopping them? We have a president stepping up and saying, you're not coming in. He's sending a very strong message. When President Trump was first elected 2 years ago, the human and drug smuggling went down to nil on the southwest border. His message was clearly received. Unfortunately, they've sat back and watched our congressional folks fight with our president, and now they're saying, hey, they can't control their borders. We're coming. We're coming.
Sheriff, I got to go, but I'm telling you, I'm going to be down there in a couple of weeks. I'm going to join you. Sheriff Mark Donnells, you do a great job. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, and a tragic day in the United States of America. Our live continuing breaking coverage of the synagogue shooting that claimed 11 lives and injured at least 6 people. It will continue here in a moment with a special second-hour edition of Justice. We'll go back live to the scene of today's tragedy, and I'll be joined by guests including Corey Lewandowski, several law enforcement, and more from the president, and play some of my interview with Eric Trump. Tonight's special edition of Justice continues at the top of the hour, just after the break.